They say the dead don't speak, but in these haunted Texas landmarks, they do more than just whisper. After investigating hundreds of locations, nothing could have prepared us for what we encountered here. The evidence we're about to show you has never been released to the public, until now. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. The phone rang just past midnight, a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short, my name, a low rasp, a warning, stay gone. My stomach twisted, the old badge on my table glinted under the lamp. I hadn't touched it in years. 5 kids, gone without a trace, no bodies, no answers, just a ruined farmhouse in a town that refused to talk. But that voice, it knew me, it wanted me back. The road to the Harper farmhouse was long and empty. Moonlight barely cut through the dense trees. My headlight swept over the rotting structure as I pulled up. The front door hung open, swaying in the wind. The air smelled of damp wood and something else, something foul. My boots crunched over dead leaves as I stepped inside. The floor sagged under my weight. Dust hung in the air, disturbed. Someone had been here recently, a footprint in the dirt, fresh. The hair on my arm stood up. The silence pressed in, too thick, too expectant, as if the house itself was waiting. A noise, a slow creak from above. My pulse kicked up. No gun, just my phone. My flashlight beam sliced through the darkness as I climbed the stairs. Each step groaned under me. The hallway stretched long and narrow. A door at the end stood slightly ajar. Light flickered in. I swallowed hard. The metallic tang of blood filled my nose. My breath turned shallow. Inside, the walls were covered in old newspaper clippings, photos, faces of the missing children. My stomach clenched. 5 pairs of small shoes sat in a neat row on the dusty floor. My skin went cold. My mouth went dry. A whisper, right behind me. My breath hitched. I swung the light. Nothing. But I wasn't alone. The air shifted. Footsteps outside the door. Slow, deliberate. My heart slammed against my ribs. I turned back. Sheriff Randall Grayson stood in the hallway, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark, hollow, like he'd seen something he wished he could forget. "Leave," he said. Flat, unyielding, no room for argument. My chest tightened. He knew, he'd always known. The files, the inconsistencies, the way he shut down any real investigation. I took a step forward. His jaw clenched, his fingers twitched. A muscle jumped in his cheek. He was holding something back, something bigger than I could guess. A sound, a scratching from within the walls, a faint, desperate noise, nails against wood. My breath turned to ice. The floor beneath me shifted. Something moved under the house. The scratching turned into clawing, more frantic, more insistent. My legs felt rooted in place. Grayson's grip closed around my arm. His fingers dug in. "You don't want to know." Urgent now, fear in his voice, real fear. Something I never thought I'd hear from him. I ripped free. The house groaned around me, a deep, unnatural creak. The walls shuddered. The scratching grew frantic, clawing, digging. The boards beneath my feet trembled. The walls seemed to close in. I ran. The night swallowed me whole as I sped down the road. The farmhouse shrinking in my rearview mirror. I pulled over miles later, hands shaking on the wheel. My breath came in gasps. My phone buzzed. A new voicemail. I swallowed hard and pressed play. Silence then. That same rasping voice. "You should have stayed gone." By morning, the farmhouse was gone, burned to the ground. No official report, no news coverage. Just ashes. Sheriff Grayson retired the same day. Disappeared. No forwarding address, no trace of him anywhere. I moved, changed my number, changed my life, but at night, I still hear it, the whisper, the scratching, the weight of unseen eyes pressing in. And I know someone is still watching, waiting, and whatever was in that house, it isn't finished. I wasn't supposed to be out there alone. My boss made it clear, check the boundaries, flag any major changes, get out, standard land survey. No one had touched the Holloway Ranch in years, and there was talk about selling it off. Just another job. Except from the moment I stepped onto that property, something felt wrong. The air was heavy, stagnant, like the land itself had been waiting too long. The main house was just a skeleton, roof half caved in, windows gaping like empty eye sockets. I kept my distance. Place like that, you don't go poking around unless you want trouble. The barns weren't much better. Sun-bleached wood, rusted hinges, something foul in the air. Cows hadn't been here in decades, but the smell of decay stuck like it had soaked into the ground. I was about 2 hours in when I found the first hole, just past the dried-up creek bed where the land dipped a little, a narrow opening barely wider than a manhole. No records of any wells out here, no reason for anything to be dug. I knelt down, peered in. Darkness, deep enough that my flashlight barely scratched the surface. I should have logged it, marked the GPS, and moved on, but something about it wasn't just a hole, it was an entrance. The ladder was old, but solid, too solid. Like someone had been keeping it up. I hesitated, then started down. 10 feet, 20, the air changed, damp, thick with something I couldn't name. At the bottom, my boots hit dirt. A tunnel, walls lined with old timber, some parts reinforced with metal. I stepped forward, sweeping my light over the ground. Footprints, not old either, recent. My gut twisted. This place wasn't abandoned. I moved slow, every step careful. The tunnel stretched ahead, curving slightly. Then I saw them. Doors, heavy steel built right into the walls. Some shut, some hanging open. The first one I checked had nothing but an old mattress and chains bolted to the floor. The second, claw marks, deep, erratic, carved into the metal like someone had been trying to escape. My breathing went shallow. I wasn't alone down here. A noise, faint behind me. I spun, light bouncing off the tunnel walls. Silence. I wasn't staying to find out. I turned, started back toward the ladder. Then I saw it. A table. Wooden, worn down, but covered in something dark. The smell hit me first, coppery, rotten. Dried blood, smeared across the surface, pooling in the cracks. And next to it, a notebook. Pages curled, stained. I flipped it open with shaking hands. Silas Holloway's name was scrawled at the top. The entries were short. Dates, descriptions, names. People who had come to the ranch. Salesmen, drifters, a land surveyor. My stomach lurched. The last entry, 2 weeks ago. No name, just one line. Still down here. My breath hitched. The sound again, closer. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. I killed the flashlight, backed against the tunnel wall. The darkness swallowed everything. My pulse hammered in my ears. A whisper, barely there, a ragged breath. Too close. I moved, didn't think, just ran. The ladder. My fingers fumbled, boots slipping on the rungs. Something brushed my ankle. I kicked, scrambled up. The second I hit open air, I ran. Didn't stop, didn't breathe right until I was back in my truck, gravel spitting under my tires as I tore down that dirt road. I reported it. The tunnels, the doors, the notebook, they sent a team. Searched the whole property, nothing. No doors, no table, no blood. Just an empty tunnel and a rusted ladder. No evidence of anything. I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know someone was down there, someone who wasn't supposed to be. I never went back, but sometimes, late at night, I wonder if that last entry wasn't about a prisoner. If maybe, just maybe. Silas Holloway never really left. The nightmare started a week later. At first, just flashes, dark corridors, the sound of chains dragging, whispers that didn't make sense. Then they got worse. I'd wake up gasping, heart slamming in my chest, the sensation of something reaching for me still fresh on my skin. More than once, I woke to find my bedroom window open. I never left it open. Then the calls started. At first, just static on the other end, then breathing. Slow, shallow. I stopped answering and let them go to voicemail, but they didn't stop. One night, just past midnight, I made the mistake of listening. A voice, hoarse, barely above a whisper, still down here. I left town the next day, packed what I could, quit my job, and put as many miles as I could between me and that ranch. But no matter where I go, it follows me. The feeling, the whispers, the cold dread crawling up my spine when I'm alone. It's been months now, and tonight I found dirt on my bedroom floor, a small pile, just beneath the window. If you've ever walked into a place and felt something was just wrong, You know what I felt that day. The house was beautiful. 3 stories, old Southern charm, white columns, wraparound porch, a dream home, and except no one stayed. Every buyer left within a week. That's what my boss told me, laughing it off, but I could see it in his eyes. He was uneasy too. Still, I was new, hungry. I needed my first big sale, and this house was supposed to be an easy sell. Historic, spacious, a steal for the price. Wesley Monroe was the last buyer. Young guy, late 20s, successful but not showy. I found his number in the file, decided to call him. No answer. I checked the notes. Don't go, don't stay after dark, don't listen. Just that. Scrawled in messy handwriting, I rolled my eyes. Probably a prank, but still, it stuck with me. First time I went to the house, it was the middle of the afternoon. Sun was high, wind was still. Everything looked perfect, but the second I stepped inside, the air changed, heavy, thick, like walking into a place that didn't want me there. Houses don't feel things, I told myself that. Kept moving. Kitchen was spotless, counters gleaming. Living room, classic fireplace, high ceilings. Every inch of it was flawless. And yet, it felt wrong. I shook it off, started going room by room, then I found the study. A huge oak desk, bookshelves packed tight, one chair slightly pulled out like someone had been sitting there, and on the desk, a single note. Did you hear it? My heart kicked up. I hadn't heard anything, not yet. But suddenly I was listening. And the house? It was too quiet. I made it quick after that, locking up, setting the alarm. Told myself I'd come back the next day. Daylight makes everything less creepy, right? Next morning I was back, coffee in hand, fresh mindset. First thing I checked, the study. The note was gone, no papers on the desk, nothing out of place. Maybe I imagined it, or maybe my boss had been there earlier. I shrugged it off, kept going, showed the place to a couple that afternoon. They loved it, said they wanted to put in an offer. I smiled, said I'd get the paperwork ready. By sunset, I was the last one there, locking up. That's when I heard it, a creak, soft, deliberate, from upstairs. I froze, heart pounding, listened. Nothing. My mind raced. Old houses make noise, settling wood, shifting pipes, that's all. I turned to leave then. Footsteps, slow, careful, coming down the stairs. I ran. Didn't think, just moved. Outside, I locked the door so fast my hands fumbled the key. Stood on the porch, breath shaky. Turned back, windows dark, no movement. I laughed, forced myself to breathe. It was nothing, just nerves. I left. That night, Wesley Monroe called me back. His voice was sharp, urgent. You went there. My stomach dropped. Yeah, it's my listing. Silence, then. Get out, don't go back. I tried to ask why, but he hung up. The couple backed out the next morning. No reason, just changed their minds. I didn't blame them, that was a week ago. The house is still on the market. I haven't been back, but last night I found a note slipped under my apartment door. 3 words. Did you hear it? I barely slept. My phone stayed by my bed. And every creak of my apartment sent my heart racing. I checked the locks. Twice, 3 times. Every light stayed on. By morning, I told myself I was being ridiculous. Just paranoia. But the feeling wouldn't shake. I went to the office, determined to put the house behind me. My boss barely looked up when I walked in. He just handed me a file. New listing, he said. Forget that place. I really should have. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. I called Wesley again. This time he picked up. What happened? I asked. Silence, then. A sigh. You're not gonna let this go, are you? No, I wasn't. He finally spoke. It starts with the sound, he said. You hear something you can't explain, and then it follows you. My blood ran cold. What follows you? I whispered. He exhaled sharply. I don't know, but it knows when you listen. I hung up, went home, tried to forget. But when I stepped into my apartment, the air was thick again, wrong. I stood in the doorway, pulse racing. Then, a sound, not loud, just enough, a whisper right behind me. Did you hear it? I still see his truck sometimes, that old red Chevy sitting in the Texas heat. Keys dangling in the ignition like he just stepped away for a minute. Dad always said he'd come back one day. I guess in a way, he finally did. I'd spent 15 years trying to forget about Thomas Bennett, the father who walked out on his family without a word. 15 years of watching Mom slowly piece herself back together, of telling myself I didn't care anymore, that the man who taught me to fish and called me his little Charlie girl wasn't worth missing. But last month, a letter arrived, no return address, just his messy handwriting and 4 words that changed everything. Charlie, I need help. At first, I almost threw it away. I mean, who does he think he is, reaching out after all this time? But something made me open it. Inside was a map. Circled in red ink was some tiny dot in West Texas. Terlingua, never heard of it. I Googled it that night and found nothing but ghost town tours and abandoned mercury mines. Something about the way the ink bled into the paper, like his hand had been shaking when he wrote it. It got to me. The next morning, I called in sick to work, packed a bag, and started driving. Mom would have said I was crazy. Maybe I was, but I had to know. The drive through Texas felt endless, nothing but desert and sky stretching out in every direction. My thoughts kept drifting back to that last morning. Dad making pancakes like always, promising to take me camping that weekend. His smile seemed normal, everything seemed normal, until he didn't come home. The police found nothing, no credit card traces, no phone activity, just gone, like he never existed. 12 hours later, I pulled into what was left of Terlingua. The sun was setting, painting everything this sickly orange color. That's when I saw it. Dad's truck, parked outside this old general store, looking exactly like it did the day he left, right down to the dent in the passenger door from when I backed into the mailbox learning to drive. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely park. The store windows were boarded up, but the door, it just swung open when I touched it. The hinges crying out in the silence. "Dad?" My voice echoed through the empty building. Nothing, just dust and silence. And this smell, like old paper and cigarettes, Dad's brand, Marlboro Reds. Then I heard it, this soft shuffling sound from the back room, like someone dragging their feet across wooden floors. My heart started pounding, but I kept going, the floorboards creaking under my feet, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the doorway, I froze. There was a chair in the middle of the room, and on it, Dad's jacket, the one Mom got him for Christmas that last year. The leather worn soft from years of use, but what made my blood run cold were the fresh cigarette butts in the ashtray beside it, still smoking. Someone had just been here, watching, waiting. That's when the door slammed behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just darkness now, and this feeling, this horrible feeling that I wasn't alone. Never had been alone. I fumbled for my phone flashlight, the beam catching dust motes dancing in the air. And that's when I saw them. Dozens of photographs pinned to the walls. All of me, at work, outside my apartment, shopping at the grocery store, getting coffee with friends. Years worth of photos. Someone had been watching me, following me, every moment of my life documented in horrible detail. And in the center, a note in Dad's handwriting. "I'm so sorry, Charlie. I tried to stop them. Don't look for me again." My legs gave out. I hit the floor hard, the impact sending clouds of dust into the air. The shuffling sound started again, closer now, coming from just outside the door. I ran, faster than I've ever run in my life, got in my car and didn't stop until I hit the state line. That was 3 weeks ago. I filed a police report, but they didn't find anything, just an empty building and a lot of questions. The photos were gone, like they'd never been there. Dad's truck is still there, according to the detective. Keys in the ignition, like he's coming right back. They keep asking me why I went there. What made me drive 12 hours into the desert on the word of a letter? I tell them about Dad, about the map, but when I try to show them, the letter's gone from my apartment like everything else, vanished without a trace. Sometimes at night, I think I hear shuffling sounds outside my apartment, but when I look, there's never anyone there, just this feeling that somewhere out there, someone is still watching, still waiting. And I know now Dad didn't abandon us. He was trying to protect us. From what? I'm afraid I'm going to find out, because yesterday, another letter came, same handwriting, same red ink, but this time, just 2 words. They're coming. The sound of the sound of shuffling feet keeps getting closer. I can't believe I was stupid enough to take that bet. Looking back, the signs were all there, but when you're a broke college student and someone waves $500 in your face, well, you do dumb things. My name is Elliot Frazier, and this is what happened to me at the Majestic Opera House in Austin last October. The bet seems simple enough. Spend one night alone inside the abandoned building. Just me, my phone, and whatever ghosts might be lurking in those halls. I'm not usually the type for dares or urban exploration, but my student loans were crushing me. And like I said, $500. The Opera House had been closed for decades, ever since a string of unexplained accidents in the 1980s. At least that's what my friend Marcus told me when he proposed the bet. He'd gotten the key from his uncle who worked for the city's Historical Preservation Society. I should have asked more questions, should have done some research, but I didn't. I showed up at sunset with just my backpack, some snacks, water, a flashlight, and my fully charged phone. The building loomed over me like a crumbling giant. Its stone facade was weathered and stained. Thick vines crept up the walls. The windows were dark, empty eyes staring down at me. Marcus let me in through a side door. "I'll be back at sunrise," he said with a grin. "Try not to die." The lock clicked behind me, and I was alone. The air inside was thick with dust and decay. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper and torn carpet. I made my way to the main auditorium first. The seats were still there, rows and rows of faded red velvet stretching up into the shadows. The stage was massive. Its heavy curtain hung in tatters. I climbed up onto it, feeling a weird urge to take a bow to my invisible audience. That's when I noticed the door, small and unmarked, tucked away in the back corner of the stage. It wasn't locked. Inside was what looked like an old office. Filing cabinets lined the walls, and on a desk, covered in decades of dust, was a stack of playbills. I started flipping through them, reading the cast lists, looking at the faded photographs, and then I saw it. A familiar name, Victor Langston. I remembered reading about him in a true crime forum. He was an actor who'd been murdered in his dressing room, stabbed 17 times. The playbill in my hand was for his final performance. The show date was today's date, just 40 years earlier. My hand started shaking as I went through more programs. 5 more actors, all murdered, all with final performances listed for October 15th. I grabbed my phone to Google their names, to prove I was imagining things. No signal. Of course, the temperature seemed to drop. I heard something, footsteps maybe, echoing from somewhere in the building. And then a voice, singing. It was coming from behind me, from the stage. I turned slowly. There was a figure there, barely visible in the dim light, tall, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned suit. "I've been waiting for you, Elliot," the voice said. It was cultured, refined, familiar somehow. "We've been waiting for quite some time." I ran, dropped my flashlight, slammed into walls, tripped over debris, finally found that side door and burst out into the night air. Marcus was there, hours early, looking pale. "I was just coming to get you," he said. "I found some old news articles about what really happened here, about the murders, about Victor Langston." I never went back to get my flashlight, never told anyone what I saw on that stage. But sometimes when I'm alone at night, I swear I can hear that voice, singing, waiting for the next performance to begin. I never wanted to be that person, the one who digs too deep and finds something they shouldn't. But here I am, sitting in my car outside Mason Cemetery at 3 a.m., trying to make sense of what I discovered. My hands are shaking as I type this. I need to get it all down, while I still can. It started 3 weeks ago when I was researching for my blog about Texas' most haunted places. I'd been doing this for years, building up a decent following. Nothing major, just enough to pay the bills and keep me interested in the next story. Mason Cemetery seemed pretty standard at first. Your typical centuries-old graveyard with the usual ghost stories, local teens sharing stories about mysterious lights, groundskeepers reporting whispers in the fog, the kind of stuff that gets clicks but never really leads anywhere. But something caught my eye while I was photographing the headstones. A fresh grave, pristine marble with the name Gregory Haynes. I recognized that name. He'd been featured in a local business magazine I'd read just last week. The dates didn't make sense. Born 1980, died 2024. That's when my stomach dropped. Gregory Haynes couldn't be dead. I'd just read about his new tech startup. I told myself it had to be a coincidence, maybe another Gregory Haynes, but I couldn't shake this feeling. Something was wrong. I started digging deeper, checking records, obituaries, news articles. Nothing about Gregory Haynes' death. Instead, I found something much worse. Police reports, missing persons cases, all filed exactly 1 year ago. 5 people, all with matching names on fresh graves in Mason Cemetery. My blog followers noticed something was off. Comments started coming in. "Nina, you okay? Your latest posts seem different." I ignored them, had to focus, had to understand what was happening. My heart was racing when I pulled up Gregory's company website. The phone number was still active. I called, my hands trembling as I pressed the numbers. A woman answered. "Hello, Haynes Technologies." I almost dropped my phone. "Hi, I'm looking for Gregory Haynes." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry, Mr. Haynes has been missing for about a year now." My blood went cold. I thanked her and hung up. That's when the text started. "Unknown number. Stop looking." I ignored it. Then another. "Mason Cemetery isn't finished collecting." The next day, my blog went down. "Technical difficulties," the host said. But when I checked the back end, everything was gone. Years of work just vanished. Like it never existed, like someone wanted to erase any connection to what I'd found. I drove out to the cemetery that night. I had to see the graves again, had to prove to myself I wasn't crazy. The iron gates were open, which was strange for that hour. They squealed as I pushed through. The beam of my flashlight caught something that made me freeze. A new headstone installed since my last visit. The marble was so white it seemed to glow. The name carved into it made my heart stop. Nina Caldwell. My name, my birth date, and a death date exactly 1 year from today. I ran, drove home in a panic, called the police, but they just took a report, said they'd look into it. But I know they won't find anything, because I went back the next day. In broad daylight, that headstone with my name, gone, like it never existed. But the others are still there, Gregory Haynes and the rest. All missing, all presumed dead. Their graves waiting for them. A year in advance. I'm writing this now because I don't know how much time I have left. The cemetery knows something about the missing people, about me. I keep seeing shadows moving outside my window, hearing footsteps when I'm alone. My phone keeps ringing, unknown numbers. When I answer, there's just the sound of wind through trees. And sometimes I think I hear whispers saying my name. That's why I'm here, back at Mason Cemetery, because whatever's happening, it started here and I need answers, even if I'm running out of time. The groundskeeper's truck isn't in its usual spot. The gates are open again, and there's fresh dirt on the plot where I saw my headstone, still warm, like it was just dug up. If you're reading this and something happens to me, look for the fresh graves, the ones with names of the living. They're not mistakes. They're warnings. Or maybe they're promises. I hear footsteps on the gravel behind me now. Heavy ones. I'm going to turn around. I have to know. I have to.